People should be able to make decisions based on their own conscience around some of these issues and not based on a rule in a book, right? So, and my fear would be that those that already feel marginalised in parts of the country where there is little or no voice for inclusion or voice for anti-discriminatory practice and so on would feel even more isolated if we were to divide. I think that would be a
Just
shame.
one other thing too,
Yeah.
I would just add, I think a strength that we have going forward is the increasing scholarship in the ancient Near Eastern world and the greater understanding of the Leviticus text,
Yes.
which is the basis upon which a lot of this information
Mhm.
goes forward. If you look at more and more is understood about the context in which that was said,
Mhm.
and therefore you're looking at a social setting and understanding why that particular edict was made at the time, which doesn't necessarily apply now.
Yeah.
And the more people understand that, then that takes out, it is a biblically sound principle.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Just like the comments in the letters of Paul, that Paul didn't want to write.
Right.
Well, women don't cut your hair, don't stand up,
Right,
don't
exactly.
speak in church.
Yeah.
I wanted to speak to that in a second. I know Eric has something.
Yeah.
In terms of the discussion going forward, one thing that has always fascinated me is this statement about incompatibility with Christian teaching. And I'm not aware of any teaching by Christ about sexuality at all. And if there's any foundational teaching of Christ, it's love and inclusion and reaching out. So it sort of seems it's almost low-hanging fruit that that very phrase is in fact incompatible with the teachings of Christ. And I don't know if there's any plan on that being an explicit part of the discussion, or that might be taken as too confrontational.
Well, no, and I think, to be honest with you, that is the core of our call to biblical obedience. But we're framing it as biblical obedience. So, in the sense that if we take the Bible as a whole, and we look at Scripture as a whole, and we look at the message of God's justice and how Jesus represented God on the earth and what he stood for and what he said, that we can stand firmly in a grounding of scriptural truth and be grounded in the Bible without going down that route of those 6 verses that people want to use to bash people with. And so I think that message, what you just said, is often used as we talk about biblical obedience, as we talk about following the way of Jesus, right? That's often used as a common kind of frame. Yeah. Doug, you wanted to speak?
Well, I was just going to say that how important it is to understand Scripture well enough so that you understand arguments on the other side. But I think a lot of progressives have so rejected the Bible that we can't even use it as a defense. So that the point that you make is a really simple point, and you can tell a person Jesus never addressed homosexuality directly at all. Or he did other things in hyperbole, and he didn't mean, he was using a figure of speech. So I think on one hand you need to know the Scripture well enough to be able to argue your point, but also the point too that the Bible it's like a constitution, so you have to look at the trajectory. You can't pull out pieces of the Bible and decide that somehow speaks for the entire Bible. This word about Paul and cutting the hair doesn't speak for all of Paul's message. There's something beautiful there in the trajectory. So it's unfair to pull pieces of Scripture out to make your case, and it really comes down to an irrational argument of bias in your gut against something. And we still haven't found a way to deal with that gut bias.
Well, it's years and generations of fear-based stuff that has unfortunately, tragically, been propagated by the church at large. I'm not talking about any particular church, but the church at large has been responsible for dreadful things. And in an ideal world, it would have been the church that was leading the movement against the injustice, right? We shouldn't be playing catch-up. A lot of times, those on the conservatives will say, well, we shouldn't just do this because culture is telling us to do this. And I say, you're right, we shouldn't. We should have been we should have been the ones leading the way. Right now we're catching up. That's not right, it's the wrong way around. The church should have been the ones setting the pace on this. So,
Another quick point.
Yeah.
I like that you shared how important it is for us to reach out to our neighborhood, the churches that we think are in progressive Massachusetts. But you can't forget that it was a Christian in Massachusetts who initiated a movement in Uganda, a fear-based movement to connect homosexuality with AIDS, with death. And from Massachusetts, he came from somewhere else, but so the conversations we have in progressive New England matter.
totally.
So I think that strategy.
Springfield, Scott Lively, I went to the, yes, and I, you know, the louder the churches the louder the churches are that are saying, I don't stand with the churches that are saying this is not okay, as Scott Lively was Doug's referring to. You know, we need to have our voices up and out there. It's critical that we're the ones taking a stand and making it known again.
This might be something that would come up at the training sort of thing, but you know, this is a federated church. It's different. So I don't have a sense that if we called up the Newtonville UMC and spoke to the pastor and said, we're interested in knowing where you are on this and so on and so forth, does the church take any kind of a hit from the umbrella of the UMC because they're thinking about becoming an RMN?
Certainly not here.
Okay.
Certainly not in New England. Absolutely not. No. And I think ideally this is a relational work, right? So you ideally want to sort of get together and say, does anyone know anyone who lives in, who might know somebody who goes to this church? You know, so the cold call thing would be, unless, like, for example, Doug's likely to have connections from a clergy perspective, or there might be others, you know, who might have connections maybe through seminary or something like that, right? So ideally you'd be working with existing relationships and who you know. And it might, you know, here's the other thing, you might be going to a Zumba class and you never knew that person, you know, maybe you strike up a conversation about what happened at church this Sunday. That's a shocking thought. And so, you know, and maybe you know people you don't know, that you know them, that are in these churches or are connected with these churches.
But are you saying don't start at the level with the pastor, try and start with the...
I'm saying there's no one-size-fits-all answer to that question. It's on a case-by-case basis. So what I would, and I would work with you, for example, we have a database so I can find out who lives in the area, and we can send emails and say, we noticed you live within 10 miles of that particular church. Do you happen to go to that church? If not, do you know anyone? So we can use all kinds of things to help start those conversations. So I don't think there's not one answer to that. It's different situations. The key is to have the conversations and not to let that be a barrier, because there are ways to have those conversations. Yeah.
There's a lot of things going on in society and politics, like who marches in the St. Patrick's Day Parade, in the military, can be in the military, and different state laws. How do things in society or in politics or outside the church is so dynamic? Does that have an impact on the things you do, or just the direction things are going on in the church or your work with the UMC?
So I would say that day to day probably doesn't influence things in terms of our focus and what we're trying to achieve. But I would say in terms of the conversations we have in trying to achieve those things, it certainly impacts it, right? So, and in the way we put our message out. So Andy Oliver is our Director of Communications, and he runs our Facebook and our Twitter and the website and all that kind of stuff. So he would totally, we would work with the things that are happening culturally and in society to help have the conversation that we want to have, if that makes sense, right? So, so we pick on one thing. So, when Dogma happened, obviously that was a huge thing. So we would have had blog posts that kind of centered around that, maybe, or responses to that and things like that. Is that the kind of question you're asking? I don't know if I'm hitting it quite right.
No, yeah, you are.
So we wouldn't be driven by that in a sense, except that all those things are part of the larger conversation that's happening. And this is the thing that's funny to me, is that there's no way that anyone that lives in the United States, or at least within a certain area of cities within the United States, is not aware that this conversation is happening. And sometimes in our churches, I think we want to think that when they walk out the door, they're not, people aren't hearing these conversations, or the kids in the schools. In New England, it's not such a big deal, but I'm thinking more in the more conservative parts of the country, that they want to deny that this is part of the conversation, and you can't. This is happening.
Even sports,
Yes.
football, it's just
Yes.
even a current topic
Yes.
in sports, which is
Yes.
interesting.
Which is why I kind of say is that it looks like we're catching up to the cultural changes, and that people complain that we shouldn't be driven by the cultural changes. And which is my point, is like, you're right, we shouldn't be, because we should have been shown the way. and we haven't shown the way.
Because the culture really hasn't changed, it's just getting more visible.
It's getting more visible, and I think it is shifting. If you look at the percentages of people who are, you know, will say they're approve of same-sex marriage across the country, the numbers are shifting drastically. So, yeah, Dan, I think you're gonna...
Well, I just wanted to say, we need to kind of...
Oh, sorry.
And I want to give open, affirming, and reconciling another chance to make your pitch, because